February 24, 2010, SeaWorld Orlando. The Dine with Shamu show has just ended to thunderous applause. Families finish their meals while gazing through massive underwater windows at the most magnificent predators on Earth. But in the shallow ledge area, something is terribly wrong. 40-year-old Dawn Brancheau lies on her stomach, gently rubbing the massive head of Tilikum, 22 feet and 12,000 pounds of apex predator that has killed before. The orca's black eye stares up at her with intelligence that seems almost human. But beneath that intelligence lurks something else, something wild, something that 60 years of captivity have twisted into rage. In 30 seconds, the most experienced trainer at SeaWorld will be dragged into a nightmare that will change everything. Her screams will echo through the stadium as 2,500 visitors watch in horror. And Tilikum will remind the world what it truly means to be a killer whale. Dawn Brancheau lived for moments like these. At 40 years old, she was SeaWorld's golden girl, the trainer whose genuine love for orcas shone through every performance. 16 years of experience working with the ocean's apex predators, thousands of hours spent in the water with creatures that could kill her without effort. Dawn hadn't stumbled into this career by accident. As a child, she had dreamed of working with marine mammals, drawn by their intelligence, their grace, their mysterious connection to a world humans could never fully understand. She studied psychology and animal behavior, preparing herself for a life dedicated to these magnificent creatures. Her colleagues at SeaWorld described her as fearless, but never reckless. She understood the power of the animals she worked with. She respected their capabilities. She followed protocols developed over decades of marine mammal training. But more than anything, she genuinely believed in the bond between human and orca. Dawn had this amazing connection with the whales, her supervisor would later say. She could calm them when others couldn't. She seemed to speak their language. That belief in connection, in the possibility of genuine friendship between species, was both Dawn's greatest strength and her fatal weakness. She saw intelligence and emotion in orcas that others missed. She believed that years of careful relationship building had created bonds that transcended the predator-prey relationship that governed the natural world. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Dawn's specialty was working with Tilikum, SeaWorld's largest and most famous orca. For years, she had been one of the few trainers trusted to work closely with the massive bull. She knew his moods, his preferences, his subtle signals of agitation or contentment. She believed she understood him. But understanding and controlling are very different things. And Tilikum was about to demonstrate that no amount of human love could change what millions of years of evolution had created. The ocean's perfect killing machine. Tilikum's story began in the frigid waters off Iceland in 1983. Just 2 years old when he was captured, torn from his family pod and thrust into a world of concrete pools and human demands. For 27 years he had lived in captivity, performing tricks for crowds who saw him as entertainment, rather than the apex predator he was born to be. At 22 feet long and weighing over 6 tons, Tilikum was a giant even among orcas. His massive black and white bulk dominated every pool he entered. His presence commanded respect from both trainers and other whales. He was SeaWorld's primary breeding bull, father to many of the captive orcas performing in marine parks around the world. But Tilikum carried darkness within him that decades of training had never erased. He had killed before, twice. In 1991, while performing at Sealand of the Pacific in Canada, Tilikum had been involved in the death of trainer Kelty Burns. The young woman had slipped into the pool during a show, and Tilikum, along with 2 other orcas, had prevented her from reaching safety. They played with her like a toy until she drowned. In 1999, a trespasser named Daniel Dukes had been found dead in Tilikum's pool at SeaWorld. The man had apparently entered the water during the night, and Tilikum had killed him, displaying the body on his back like a trophy. 2 deaths, 2 warnings that this particular orca was different, more dangerous, less predictable than the others. But SeaWorld continued to use Tilikum in shows, continued to put trainers in the water with him, continued to believe that years of training and relationship building had somehow domesticated a creature that had never been domestic to begin with. Marine biologists who studied wild orcas knew better. In the ocean, orcas are cooperative hunters that can take down blue whales. They are intelligent enough to develop hunting strategies that pass from generation to generation. They are powerful enough to beach themselves to catch seals and return to the water unharmed. They are, in every sense of the word, apex predators. And apex predators, no matter how many fish they're fed or how many tricks they're taught, never forget what they truly are. February 24, 2010, started like any other day at SeaWorld Orlando. Dawn arrived early, as she always did, to prepare for the day's shows. The Dine with Shamu performance was one of her favorites. An intimate setting where guests could watch orcas perform while enjoying lunch in the stadium's restaurant area. The show itself went perfectly. Tilikum performed his routines flawlessly, responding to Dawn's signals with the precision that came from years of practice. The audience was delighted. Children pressed their faces against the massive viewing windows, and parents took photos of their families with killer whales in the background. After the show ended, Dawn remained on the shallow ledge area with Tilikum for what trainers called a relationship session. A calm period of interaction designed to reinforce the bond between trainer and whale. These sessions were considered low risk, routine interactions that experienced trainers like Dawn had performed thousands of times. Dawn lay on her stomach on the concrete ledge, her feet in the shallow water, her hands gently stroking Tilikum's massive head. To observers, it looked like a moment of genuine affection between human and whale. Dawn appeared relaxed, comfortable, completely at ease with the 6-ton predator whose head was larger than her entire torso. But something was different that day. Something in Tilikum's behavior that even Dawn's experienced eye might have missed. A tension, a calculation, a decision being made in the complex brain of a creature that had spent 27 years learning to hate the captivity that defined his existence. The attack, when it came, was swift and without warning. No gradual buildup, no obvious trigger, no chance for Dawn to recognize danger and react. One moment, she was stroking Tilikum's head in apparent harmony. The next moment, she was fighting for her life in the grip of a creature, powerful enough to crush her bones without effort. What happened next was witnessed by over 100 people, including families with young children who had come to SeaWorld for a fun day out. Their afternoon of entertainment became a nightmare that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Without any warning sign that observers could detect, Tilikum suddenly lunged forward and grabbed Dawn. The initial grab was so fast that witnesses disagreed about exactly what happened. Some saw him grab her arm, others thought he had seized her shoulder. SeaWorld would later claim he grabbed her ponytail, though this version would be disputed by both witnesses and investigators. What everyone agreed on was what happened next. Tilikum pulled Dawn into the water with the casual ease of a creature that had never met anything stronger than himself. The massive orca immediately dove deep, taking Dawn with him. For those watching through the underwater viewing windows, the sight was beyond comprehension. A human being, someone they had just watched performing with apparent safety and skill, was now trapped in the jaws of a predator that seemed to fill the entire pool. Security officer Freddy Herrera, watching from the deck above, saw Dawn struggling desperately to free herself. "I could see she was trying to get away," he would later testify. But Tilikum was so much bigger, so much stronger, she didn't have a chance. Guest Jan Topolewski watched in horror from the restaurant area as the attack unfolded below the water. "I saw Dawn's long hair floating in the water, and Tilikum had it in his mouth. She was struggling to free her hair, but he was so powerful." But Tilikum wasn't just holding Dawn underwater. He was actively attacking her. He shook her back and forth, just like orcas do with seals to snap their spines. It was intense and brutal. He held her deep underwater, using his superior lung capacity to drown an air-breathing mammal. He treated her exactly like what his instincts told him she was: prey. The attack seemed to go on forever, though it lasted only minutes. Tilikum would surface briefly, allowing horrified observers to see Dawn still alive, still struggling, before diving again to continue the assault. Each time he surfaced, Dawn appeared weaker, more desperate, closer to the end. Alarms began blaring throughout SeaWorld Orlando as emergency protocols activated. Staff members who had trained for years for exactly this scenario sprang into action, though none of them had ever imagined it would happen to someone like Dawn, with an orca like Tilikum. Other trainers rushed to the pool edge with buckets of fish, whistles, and every tool they had ever used to control orcas. They shouted commands at Tilikum, tried to lure him away from Dawn with food, attempted to use the training techniques that had always worked before, but Tilikum ignored them completely. The commands that had controlled him for 27 years meant nothing now. The fish that had motivated him through thousands of performances couldn't compete with the predatory instincts that had finally been unleashed. He was no longer a performing whale following human commands. He was an apex predator with prey in his jaws. Emergency personnel deployed nets, hoping to separate Tilikum from Dawn, or at least create enough distraction to make him release her. But the massive orca was far too powerful and far too focused to be deterred by anything humans could do. In desperation, staff began draining the pool, hoping that dropping water levels would force Tilikum to release Dawn or at least make it easier to reach her. But even as the water level dropped, the massive orca refused to let go of his victim. Security footage would later show the full horror of those final minutes, though SeaWorld has never released the tapes to the public. Dawn Brancheau, one of the most experienced marine mammal trainers in the world, reduced to helpless prey in the jaws of a creature she had believed loved her. By the time rescuers finally managed to separate Tilikum from Dawn's body, nearly 40 minutes had passed. 40 minutes of terror for the observers, 40 minutes of desperate rescue attempts by staff, and 40 minutes of unspeakable horror for Dawn Brancheau. When they finally pulled her from the water, it was clear that no amount of medical intervention could save her. The autopsy would later reveal the full extent of her injuries. Multiple traumatic injuries, drowning, blunt force trauma to her head, neck, and torso, fractures of ribs and cervical vertebrae, dislocation of joints, avulsion of scalp, severe compression injuries. The clinical language of the medical examiner's report couldn't capture the brutality of what had happened, but it painted a clear picture. Dawn Brancheau had been killed by a predator using techniques evolved over millions of years to kill efficiently and completely. The guests who witnessed the attack were evacuated from the stadium, many of them in shock, children crying, adults struggling to process what they had seen. The dine with Shamu, experience they had paid for, had become a front-row seat to a killing that would change everything about how the world viewed marine mammal captivity. Tilikum himself seemed calm after the attack, as if nothing unusual had happened. He floated peacefully in his pool, showing no signs of agitation or stress. To him, this had not been an aberrant behavior or a moment of madness. This had been natural. This had been what orcas do when the artificial constraints of captivity finally fail to contain their true nature. Almost immediately after Dawn's death, SeaWorld began crafting a narrative that would protect the company from liability while preserving public confidence in marine mammal shows. The story they told was carefully designed to place blame on Dawn, rather than acknowledge the fundamental dangers of putting humans in close contact with apex predators. According to SeaWorld's initial version of events, Dawn had made a mistake that triggered the attack. Specifically, they claimed that Tilikum had grabbed her ponytail, which was supposedly long enough to hang in the water, and confuse the orca. This ponytail theory suggested that Tilikum had mistaken Dawn's hair for a toy or a fish, making the attack an accident rather than predatory behavior. The ponytail theory served multiple purposes for SeaWorld. It suggested that the attack was Dawn's fault for not securing her hair properly. It implied that Tilikum had acted out of confusion rather than aggression, and it maintained the fiction that orcas in captivity were gentle giants that only became dangerous when humans made errors. But the ponytail theory fell apart under scrutiny. Witnesses who had seen the attack from multiple angles disagreed with SeaWorld's version of events. Many testified that they had seen Tilikum grab Dawn by her arm or shoulder, not her hair. Security footage, which SeaWorld refused to release publicly, apparently contradicted the company's claims. More importantly, The ponytail theory ignored Tilikum's history of killing humans and the well-documented psychological effects of orca captivity. This wasn't a confused whale making an innocent mistake. This was a predator that had finally stopped suppressing its natural instincts. Federal investigators from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, conducted their own investigation and reached very different conclusions. They found that SeaWorld had failed to protect its employees from known dangers, that Tilikum's history of aggression made him an ongoing threat, and that Dawn's death was predictable given the circumstances of orca captivity. The real story of Dawn Brancheau's death began to emerge through federal investigations, lawsuits, and eventually the documentary Blackfish, which exposed the dark reality of orca captivity to a global audience. The truth was simpler and more horrifying than SeaWorld's carefully crafted narrative. Tilikum had killed Dawn because he was an apex predator that had spent 27 years in captivity, deprived of everything that made life meaningful for a wild orca. He had been separated from his family as a young calf. He had been confined to concrete pools that were equivalent to bathtubs for a creature designed to swim hundreds of miles a day. He had been forced to perform tricks for food and human entertainment. Most importantly, he had been psychologically damaged by decades of captivity in ways that marine parks had never acknowledged. Wild orcas live in complex family groups with sophisticated social structures. They have distinct cultures, languages, and hunting traditions passed down through generations. They are among the most intelligent creatures on Earth, with brains that process emotions and social relationships in ways humans are only beginning to understand. Tilikum had been deprived of all of this. He had lived in social isolation, confined with orcas from different populations who didn't share his cultural background. He had been forced to live in an artificial environment that bore no resemblance to the ocean he had been born to inhabit. He had spent his entire adult life as a performer and breeding machine, rather than the complex, intelligent being he actually was. The wonder isn't that Tilikum finally killed a trainer. The wonder is that he had suppressed his natural instincts for as long as he did. Dawn Brancheau's death marked a turning point in public perception of marine mammal captivity. The Blackfish documentary, released in 2013, used her story to expose the psychological trauma inflicted on orcas in captivity and the dangers faced by trainers who worked with these damaged apex predators. SeaWorld's business model, built on the fantasy that killer whales were gentle giants who enjoyed performing for human audiences, could not survive the truth about what had happened to Dawn. Attendance at SeaWorld parks plummeted, stock prices collapsed, corporate sponsors fled. The company was forced to end its orca breeding program and phase out killer whale shows. More importantly, Dawn's death led to fundamental changes in how trainer safety was managed at marine parks. OSHA banned trainers from entering the water with orcas, ending the close contact interactions that had been the heart of SeaWorld's shows for decades. The era of trainers swimming with killer whales was over, but perhaps the most significant impact of Dawn's death was the broader conversation it sparked about the ethics of keeping highly intelligent, socially complex predators in captivity for human entertainment. Her death became a symbol of the costs, both human and animal, of an industry built on the illusion that wild animals could be transformed into willing performers. Dawn Brancheau died believing in something beautiful, the possibility of genuine connection between humans and the ocean's apex predators. Her love for orcas was real, her dedication absolute, her skill undeniable. But love, dedication, and skill were not enough to overcome the fundamental reality of what Tilikum was. He was not a gentle giant. He was not a willing performer. He was not a friend to humans. He was an apex predator that had been psychologically broken by decades of captivity, finally acting on instincts that no amount of training could permanently suppress. Dawn's death was tragic not just because it ended the life of a dedicated professional, but because it revealed the darker truth behind an industry that had built its fortune on the fantasy of friendly killer whales. Her final moments, captured on security cameras that SeaWorld has never released, showed the world what happens when that fantasy collides with reality. On February 24, 2010, Dawn Brancheau entered the water with Tilikum for the last time. She went in as SeaWorld's most experienced trainer, confident in her relationship with an orca she had worked with for years. She stayed as prey for a predator that had finally remembered what it was born to be. Tilikum lived for 7 more years after killing Dawn, confined to his concrete pool, still used for breeding, but never again trusted with human trainers. He died in 2017, having spent 34 of his estimated 36 years in captivity. His legacy forever linked to the woman whose death changed everything. The orcas still perform at SeaWorld, though the shows are different now. The trainers kept safely away from animals that the company finally acknowledged were too dangerous for close contact. But the illusion is gone. The fantasy of friendship between species has been replaced by the reality that some animals, no matter how long they've been in captivity, never forget what they truly are: wild, dangerous, and utterly incapable of the love that Dawn Brancheau believed could bridge the gap between human and predator. The water remembers everything, and in the depths of concrete pools around the world, other orcas wait with the same intelligence, the same psychological damage, and the same suppressed instincts that finally overwhelmed Tilikum on that terrible February day. The show must go on, but everyone now knows the true cost of the performance.